I want to thank JD for that nice introduction, and Alana, and of course the National Academy of Sciences for inviting me here this evening. They found me, I guess, through the internet, and I had written an article called Plotting the Apple of Knowledge, Tom Stoppard's Arcadia as Iterated Theatrical Algorithm. And that's what I hope to address this evening, because our topic is performing science. And I think, what is the purpose of science and art? It is to enhance and ultimately to change our perceptions of the world around us and, of course, ultimately of ourselves, I think. So Tom Stoppard became very intrigued with chaos theory, which forms the metaphor for his play, Arcadia. And it's the content of the play as well as the structure, the iterated structure of the play. Well, what is chaos theory? Now, briefly, I am no scientist. It best describes, I think it's a revolution. It's a 20th century revolution in physics and in mathematics. And revolutionary because it describes natural forms, sort of in that middle level between the atomic and the cosmic. So it describes what happens when you put the cream in your cup of coffee. You can't, uncream it. It describes patterns that emerge from weather. In other words, those things that start out as predetermined, but ultimately they are unpredictable, such as the weather, a good example today, right? So one of the things that the fractal geometry is, this is the mathematics that relates to chaos theory. And if you come up with an algorithm, you can iterate this and it will come up with a fractal image. These are these gorgeous images that you have seen, I am sure, and they're describing these natural forms, things that start out from a predetermined system, but that, have something that is just unpredictable about them. Well, Tom Stoppard loved this. He just was real intrigued by this. And being a playwright, he decided he would write a play that would use this concept and also this structure. So, just as, I'm going to make an analogy here to contemporary art, let's say a Cubist Picasso nude takes elements of the human form, rearranges it so that you can see the whole form all at once. In other words, what the Cubists were doing was overcoming that one-dimensionality of a flat canvas. So how does Stoppard take this concept? How does he overcome basically the linearity of theater, which must be performed through dialogue, through actions in space-time, right? How does he basically break up space and time? And does he succeed in Arcadia? I think he does. Okay, so his basic theme, if we want, that he's exploring, this is typically Tom Stoppard, is the human quest for knowledge. And he starts out with, let's say, the first iteration, which takes place at Sidley Park. And Sidley Park is a historic, what we'd say, grand mansion, historic property. The Coverley family lives there. And it begins in 1809, the beginning of the Romantic era, which is important because that's when, the classical forms were all breaking down. People became more interested in things like genius, irrationality, the forms of nature itself. And it takes place in a schoolroom, and it involves Septimus Hodge, who's a mathematics tutor, and his brilliant, in fact, genius 13-year-old pupil, Thomasina Coverley. Now, Thomasina Coverley, and of course this is extremely unpredictable, she is a genius, right? So she discovers chaos theory. Okay, this is, poetic license. She discovers chaos theory, and she discovers or draws a diagram of the second law of thermodynamics. Well, how come she never became famous? Is because she, again, there's the unpredictable factor here, the random factor, in the search for knowledge, she dies in a fire, like the night before her 17th birthday. So her discoveries are just never realized, never understood, of course, until the computer in the 20th century. Well, of course, swirling around this basic schoolroom teacher-student image, we have various trajectories like billiard, the billiard ball analogy for chaos theory. You've got all these balls going off in directions. And various plots centering, of course, around sex, which Tom Stoppard says is, that attraction that Newton left out back to the apple in the garden, right? So there are various stories that involve, love affairs and letters and a duel, and it's very farcical. Well, the second iteration of the chaotic, I guess, nature of the human search for knowledge takes place in the 20th century. And again, it's at Sidley Park, same Coverley family, of course, much different generation. And we have a mathematician, Valentine Coverley. And he often appears, the visuals are very important in this place. With your reading that you're going to be doing, I almost wish I could, you could flash up images. He sits there often with a computer, and, you guys can guess what type of computer do we see? The apple, of course. Yeah, right. So, this is this visual prop that goes, throughout the play. And he's, the other character that sort of centers on is Hannah Jarvis. And she's a very, staunch feminist. And she is writing a book about the Sidley Park Garden, in particular because she is a landscape kind of cultural historian. And she wants to document and write about what she calls the decline from capability Brown's, really symmetrical geometric forms down to the romantic, picturesque landscape. And she just thinks this is a horrible debasement. And at least she starts out that way. And her main focus is the image that she's trying to track down, which is going to become the symbol for her new book, called the Sidley Park Hermit. And she doesn't know who he is, but the Sidley Park Hermit, records indicate, he was this weird figure who lived in the Hermitage, which was on the grounds of Sidley Park. And he filled reams of paper with weird Kabbalistic signs and symbols about the end of the world. Okay, cuckoo, right? Real nut case, actually, right? We assume. And when he died, there were papers stacked up to the ceiling. So this is the Sidley Park Hermit mystery that Hannah's trying to uncover. Like, who was he? What was the deal with all the paper, right? Well, again, Stoppard has this around Valentine and Hannah Jarvis's search for knowledge, I guess. We have all these other characters who are kind of roaming off, centered around this, sex, the unknown factor, the unpredictable factor. And this character, who gets involved with various women in the 20th century, is Bernard Nightingale, which is just a wonderful name. And Bernard is a flamboyant Byron scholar, and he's kind of imitates his great interest, his literary interest. And he's convinced, and of course, absolutely dead wrong, because he has mistakenly found letters that really relate to Septimus, the 19th century tutor's love affairs and challenges to a duel and this kind of thing. And he says, oh, it must have been Byron, and these are undiscovered letters. And that's the real reason, he says, why Byron left England in 1809, which, this is typical Stoppard, this is actually a real mystery. Why did Byron leave England suddenly in 1809? But of course, he's wrong, because it was that, the book was just lent, and then Byron forgot to return the book. This is life, right? These are these random things that happen. But anyway, so the audience is there. We're gleefully watching Bernard, kind of heading for this Niagara Falls of, scholarly, disaster. He thoroughly intends to astound the Byron Society. And of course, Tom Stoppard himself never went to university. So I think with that character, he's having a whole lot of fun making fun of kind of that Newtonian false logic, cause, then there must be an effect for it. Well, I think that what he does then, he's got this he's got this early 19th century and he's got the 20th century. We could say it's iteration 1, then there's iteration 2, and we shuttle kind of back and forth, and in a sort of feedback loop, almost like a feedback equation, right? So we go, 19th century, 20th, boop, boop, we're going back and forth. And, if, as I said, Arcadia is Stoppard's attempt, almost his experiment, to overcome the space-time kind of linearity, that Newtonian sort of theater, how does he really do this? What are the elements we can pinpoint that say that's how he really succeeds in doing this? There are a couple of things that, obviously there's so much, but I'll just point out a few things. Components of the plot, all right, for example. And of course, plot is that wonderful pun, isn't it? How you plot something out on a screen in geometry, but it's theatrical plotting. Components of the plot are introduced in retrospect and in prospect. So what I mean by that, for example, is that Thomasina's, she makes an algorithm for plotting out, guess what, an apple leaf, right? And but we can only see that in prospect in light of the 20th century and what the computer can do. Aha, wait a minute. So what about those papers, right, stacked to the ceiling, pencil, paper, versus, you click your mouse and you're going to get an apple leaf, a fractal image of an apple leaf with a computer. So, we're gradually, as an audience, watching this, and Byron, for example, the whole, this is red herring, right? It's meaningless. Byron is the big noise, but actually Byron is nothing. He's just this kind of incidental down here in the context of the play. Byron was really the guy who we understand was at Sidley Park only when someone in the 20th century mentions it, because they have some documentation that he was there. Okay, so these are just like some examples of the plot. My point, I think, is that you're seeing it's not quite the tennis match. What we are doing is a lot of work then as an audience, because we are, in a sense, plotting that fractal image. Let's call it not the mathematical object of the apple leaf. We're plotting the aesthetic object of this play called Arcadia, which lies in a way between, doesn't it? The two different time frames, the two different sets of characters, because we're working very hard putting pieces together, and we're meant to have that aha moment many times in the course of the play. But anyway, so does he succeed in doing this kind of extra spatial, extra temporal, breaking the linearity? I think Stoppard does succeed, and I think he succeeds by giving the audience that vantage point, which really is truly sort of extra temporal, and it's extra spatial. One of the great scenes that I've seen in, 20th century theater, let me be a bit modest, is scene 7, the conclusion. Because here, the audience has pretty much put most of it together. All the characters appear on stage at the same time, which they haven't up till this point. It's always in the schoolroom. That's the one set that you have. So everybody's in the schoolroom, and the 20th century characters are dressed up in Regency, early 19th century costume, because there's going to be a Regency ball that night, right? So you have these weird anachronisms, like Valentine at the Apple computer dressed like a Regency, person. And you have characters like eating each other's food and drink, and they begin talking. And by now, the audience really is primed to realize that we're meant to see this, out of time, kind of an out of space. And so it's like they're talking across time as they talk to each other. And what is the topic of their discussion? Well, it's the doom. It's the end of the world. It's the doom of the universe. And the Valentine, the mathematician, Hannah's saying, well, wait a minute, what about this end of the world stuff? And he says, oh, that we're all doomed. He says, what is the quote? It's so wonderful. He says, yeah, yeah, sure, of course. It's called the second law of thermodynamics. We're all going to end up at room temperature, which I love that. And Hannah goes, and the audience goes, click, okay, the stacks of paper, what was this guy doing? Entropy. She's looking at a diagram, actually, which, I mean, if I were staging this, I would have it, projected up here. And what it is, it's a diagram it's a picture of entropy, which Thomasina came up with because she was swirling jam into her porridge or something, into her pudding, and she realized, wait a minute, you can't unswirl it. I mean, it's all going to disperse. It's entropy. So we're all going to end up at room temperature. And so Hannah figures out, of course, that the Sidley Park Hermit was the tutor Septimus when after, and this is all off stage. I mean, we're doing this, the audience, right? We're figuring it out with her. That's what it is. That he spent over 20 years, with a pencil and a paper, which is an impossible task, obviously. It's quixotic, because he must have known this, he never could get anywhere near iterating, and getting that fractal image for the apple leaf. So why did he do it? Because it will all end up we're all going to end up at room temperature anyway, right? Well, clearly I think what Stoppard is indicating is that he, Septimus, was doing this because given the insights that chaos theory has given us about the nature of creation, which is that, these are deterministic systems, but they're unpredictable, and we have ways kind of plotting them that despite entropy, maybe perhaps a new universe could emerge out of the ashes of the old one. So Hannah, at the very end of the play, says something like, really, it doesn't matter. Yes, the search for knowledge, of course, it's often, trivial, they're dead ends, it might be futile, it certainly is random, it certainly is unpredictable and nonlinear, but it's the wanting to know, she says, that makes us matter. Otherwise, we're going out the same way we came in. So I think what Stoppard is doing is, through this metaphor of chaos theory, through iterating his various plots, he is saying that, yes, the search, the quest for human knowledge is random, it's unpredictable, but that it is what leads us to create very, very interesting patterns. So I leave you with that. Thank you.